By certain operational metrics, flights scheduled or passengers flown, American Airlines is not only the largest air carrier in the US, but the largest in the world. And yet, by most financial metrics, margin, revenue, profit, it is the least effective of the Delta United American triopoly at actually making money. It's a curious dichotomy, but it's not explained by simple bad luck. Since 2020, at almost every major moment in which the airline's management could have made the right or the wrong decision, they made the wrong one. It started with COVID. In those earliest days of the pandemic, the big strategic call each airline had to make revolved around timeline. The aviation industry quickly understood that the demand for short-haul travel would likely recover sooner than the demand for long-haul travel due to a combination of government regulation and passenger preference. Therefore, it was clear the wide-body and long-haul planes predominantly used for intercontinental flights would not be necessary anytime soon. While each airline kept a portion of these planes operational for the skeleton international schedules they continued to operate, they each had to decide what to do with the rest of them. United kept them all. Some sat in short-term storage at their maintenance hubs, others were flown to longer-term storage at desert airports like Roswell, New Mexico, and Victorville, California. Delta took a broadly similar approach with the exception of its 777 fleet. These were old, comparatively inefficient aircraft that might not have remained in the airline's fleet for too much longer regardless, so Delta decided to just retire all 18 of them. American, meanwhile, clearly had a much more pessimistic prediction of what demand recovery would look like, and therefore they retired all of their A330, 767, and 757 aircraft, representing a massive 30% reduction in their long-haul fleet. It wasn't long before they regretted this decision. Fast forward to summer 2022, and Americans and Europeans were vaxxed and ready to travel. Transatlantic travel was up to about 90% of normal, and airlines were able to charge some of the highest fares ever thanks to the pent-up nature of this demand. People were willing to spend a lot after 2 years largely devoid of long-haul leisure travel. American Airlines, however, was only able to operate 80% of its normal schedule. They didn't have enough planes. Boeing was experiencing yet another manufacturing issue. The process for making small adjustments on the join between 787 fuselage components was not working properly, the connection between the parts was lumpier than it was supposed to be, so the FAA halted deliveries until the manufacturer could correct the issue. The consequence for American Airlines was that they didn't get 13 787 deliveries that they were expecting before the high-demand summer 2022 season. They said they wanted to operate 89% of their normal schedule, which would have been almost perfect for the 90% demand recovery that came into reality, but due to their aircraft shortage, they cut historically successful destinations like Edinburgh and Shannon. They were first on the chopping block because they'd previously been operated by the 757, the only smaller narrow-body plane equipped for transatlantic service, so it was better to devote their wide-body aircraft to higher demand destinations. American also cut their floundering Seattle to London route and made even more brutal cuts to the other continents that composed their long-haul network. Los Angeles to Sydney and Dallas to Santiago were gone, while frequencies went down to Sao Paulo, Beijing, and Shanghai, all in service of reallocating aircraft towards the Atlantic. In the years that followed, transatlantic demand stayed exceptionally strong. In 2023, Americans spent 17% more on international travel than they did in 2019. Then the next year, it went up to 27%. Just at the moment when the aviation industry came roaring back to life, American ended up with a smaller fleet, meaning they could capture less of that expansion. The money went to United and Delta. American lost out. But when Boeing finally resumed 787 deliveries, AA seemed to realize that not only did they mess up the timing of retirements, but also the composition. Their long-haul fleet was now over-indexed on newer airplanes. Newer doesn't always mean better for airlines because newer also means more expensive. Airlines almost always lease or finance aircraft, so for costlier newer airplanes, their monthly payments are higher. These higher payments can be worth it because newer generations tend to be more fuel efficient. For every hour an airline flies a newer aircraft, they effectively recoup some of the cost of the higher payments through the fuel that they don't burn. So, in order to make the trade from an older to newer aircraft worth it, there's a certain number of hours one needs to fly. American was struggling to reach those hours. Demand is seasonal. It's lower in the winter, higher in the summer, so there are fewer theoretical profitable flights one can operate in the winter, and there's value in operating less. Ideally, the airline keeps operating its more fuel-efficient aircraft at a high rate to keep offsetting the payments with fuel costs, then reduce the usage on their older aircraft where monthly payments are lower. So there's a theoretical correct ratio between newer and older aircraft, and Americans was too high. Therefore, even as they faced a shortage of aircraft, they decided to defer future deliveries of some of their incoming 787s, pushing them farther into the future to grow at a slower rate. American, therefore, still struggles to capture seasonal demand. They have to keep their aircraft operating to destinations with strong year-round demand like London, Tokyo, or Sydney. Today, 47% of their long-haul fleet is composed of newer generation wide-bodies, while for United it's 32% and Delta 37%. In 2019, American's corresponding percentage was 27%, meaning a smaller retirement of older aircraft could have put them at a similar fleet composition as their more successful competitors, but American management made the wrong call, putting them in a worse financial position. Meanwhile, the airline was floundering over the Pacific. Asia and Oceania demand is never on the scale of Europe, but there's still plenty, and more of it has always gone to United, Delta, and foreign airlines than to American. They've never really had a good way to service the Pacific. They do technically have a West Coast hub at LAX, but LAX isn't actually a very good place to have a Trans-Pacific hub, mostly because everyone has a hub there. It's literally the only airport officially designated as a hub by all three of American, Delta, and United. The consequence is that none of them have a super large domestic network from LAX, and with a smaller domestic network, there are fewer origin cities that have well-timed American services to LAX to allow for direct connection to their Trans-Pacific long hauls. United has a much bigger network from SFO, so they use that as their primary Trans-Pacific hub while offering more minimal service out of LAX. Delta, meanwhile, focuses on Seattle, meaning they have bigger domestic networks out of these other hubs than American does out of LAX, allowing them to win the war for the shortest itinerary between the endless configurations of origins and destinations over the Pacific. Seemingly having come to a reckoning, American emerged from the pandemic with a far smaller Trans-Pacific portfolio out of LAX, having pared back from 9 long-haul destinations to just 5, dropping Beijing, Shanghai, Hong Kong, Sao Paulo, and Tokyo Narita, adding Brisbane, and keeping Sydney, Auckland, Tokyo Haneda, and London. Part of the reasoning was that they were flirting with the idea of competing in Seattle instead. Delta was strong there, but so was Alaska, a short-haul only airline, at least at the time. Just 1 month before the pandemic, American and Alaska inked and announced a partnership that included, most notably, sales cooperation on Seattle flights, allowing passengers to buy an itinerary with a domestic leg operated by Alaska and an international leg serviced by American on one of their brand new long-haul flights out of the airport. They were going to start with a flashy new route to Bangalore, a southern Indian city with a massive tech sector that's economically interlinked with the US's. There's a good bit of demand for travel between Bangalore and the US, but no airline had yet made that link nonstop. American would be the first, made possible largely thanks to Seattle's position just a tiny bit closer to the very far away city. They couldn't comfortably make it from LAX year-round with maximum payload, so Seattle was the perfect place for them to operate this new 15-hour flight. London would start soon after, feeding passengers to the hub of their primary European partner airline, British Airways. They later announced a third route, Shanghai, slated to start, at least at first, in March 2021. Only one of these routes saw the light of day. Bangalore was originally pushed back rather understandably due to COVID's demand shock. Then there were those 787 delivery delays and a prudent prioritization of their tried and tested routes over this new endeavor. But then Russia invaded Ukraine, Western nations sanctioned Russia, Russia closed their airspace to the countries sanctioning them, and the flight time to India for US Airlines was now a couple hours longer, making Bangalore out of range from Seattle. The London flight did start operating, but it didn't really change much since British Airways, which co-chairs with American, already operated multiple departures out of Seattle. The Shanghai flight, meanwhile, was perpetually pushed back due to China's longer-than-average COVID restrictions that all but killed demand. Then eventually the airline decided to start a couple of flights a week to the Chinese city out of Dallas instead. The decision might have been made with knowledge of what was coming. Later that year, Alaska announced its intention to merge with Hawaiian Airlines. Hawaiian had been struggling largely due to a cratering in demand from Japan. A mix of a poor exchange rate, inflated hotel costs, and longer COVID restrictions had been reducing the number of Japanese vacationers to Hawaii. The struggling status meant Alaska was able to merge with the airline on favorable terms, and their plan was to siphon some of Hawaiian's wide-body aircraft away to build a long-haul network out of Seattle, essentially replacing American's role in the partnership. Steadily, cooperation was pared back, and perhaps as part of that, American eventually announced the cancellation of all of its long-haul routes out of Seattle, and were still faced with the same problem of a poor Trans-Pacific strategy. They'd ended up in a worse position than when they'd started. They were even further behind than before COVID. They just wasted time, resources, and money trying to make Seattle work, and it just didn't. And that wasn't even the only failed effort to build a new hub. Coming out of COVID, Austin, Texas was booming. Its status as a trendy tech hub was burgeoning pre-COVID, but the emergence from the pandemic seemed to supercharge the phenomena as Texas relaxed social distancing restrictions early and the capital became a magnet for remote workers looking for warm weather and comparatively low cost of living. Naturally, this large influx of transplanted high earners drove airport traffic up. Whereas the country overall only experienced full demand recovery in April 2023, Austin saw it a year earlier in April 2022. Its airport was not considered a hub by any of the big three U.S. airlines. They all serviced it, but only as an outstation, predominantly with flights to and from their hubs. Americans saw this as an opportunity and in summer 2021 started to massively expand their network from the city. Whereas they started the year servicing just 8 destinations from Austin, they ended with almost 40, driving an almost 5-fold increase in seat count. Part of the logic was to counter Delta's growth at the airport. They'd named Austin a focus city just before the pandemic, but then hadn't done much to grow their network there yet, so American wanted to preempt that. The airport had a rule that, essentially, in order for an airline to retain use of a gate, they had to operate at least 7 daily departures out of it. Of course, the airport was built before Austin's massive boom and was therefore operating close to capacity. If American could operate enough flights out of Austin, it could take up enough gates to prevent Delta from growing, ensuring it majority market share until the airport's major expansion project wrapped up in the 2030s, by which time all the new Austinites would have become loyal American airline flyers. At least that was the theory. The problem was, despite tremendous growth, the Austin market didn't yet have the demand to support a 5-fold increase in seat count. American attempted to rectify this by operating many of these services with smaller regional aircraft, but then that ran afoul of their long-standing agreement with the union that represents their pilots. They'd agreed to only operate a certain quantity of non-hub flights with regional aircraft, given that regional pilots are paid less than their mainline colleagues, and Austin was now pushing them above that limit. By 2023, the Austin bubble was beginning to burst. Housing prices had inflated to such a high that it no longer had that cost of living advantage, and half as many people moved to the city than the year prior. With this stagnating growth, Americans' already beleaguered strategy made even less sense, and just like in Seattle, they were forced to give up, dramatically paring back their schedule. Once again, they just wasted time, resources, and money trying to make Austin work, and it just didn't. And incredulously, as they were floundering over the Pacific and inundating Austin, American also wasted time, resources, and money on another failed strategy in the Northeast. They called it the Northeast Alliance. Just as American has long been the weakest of the big three at LAX, so too did it fall behind in New York. They have the smallest market share of the highly valuable market and little ability to rectify that given the capacity constraints at JFK, LaGuardia, and Newark. Their solution was collusion. They partner with JetBlue, co-chair their flights, share revenue, and coordinate their networks to be compatible with each other, gaining the scale to meaningfully compete. In practice, what this looked like was, for example, American terminating its Orlando route, allowing JetBlue to up its flying to the city and reallocating the American aircraft to other expanded routes. In total, they cut 18 destinations, but 10 of those were really just handing them over to JetBlue, while American focused on expanded long-haul service with new flights to Santiago, Athens, Tel Aviv, Doha, and New Delhi. It was a complex network-wide reconfiguration that the airlines argued added up to greater than the sum of its parts. And that argument was existentially important because the Department of Justice didn't love the look of the alliance. They thought it was bad for competition. Therefore, the DOJ sued on antitrust grounds. In court, the alliance's strategy was to argue that it was actually good for competition rather than bad, since American and JetBlue were weak competitors to United and Delta in the city, and therefore that one strong competitor would help weaken the duopoly more than 2 weak ones. Ultimately, the judge was not convinced, stating that this was the wrong argument to be making entirely, as American antitrust law focuses on preserving competition rather than building it through strengthening a rival. So the pair were forced to terminate their partnership, and as part of it, their networks reverted to more or less what they'd been previously. Here too, in yet another instance, American had just wasted time, resources, and money trying to make the Northeast Alliance work, and it just didn't. With revenue faltering, American looked for ways to cut costs, and one solution that proved attractive was declaring war on travel agencies. While widespread use of travel agents was largely ended by the internet, agencies are still used by companies to handle their corporate travel. These agencies will ensure that bookings follow company policies around cost, fare class, refundability, and more, and American believed they had leverage and therefore rolled out a series of changes attempting to get these agencies to work more on their terms. In particular, they really wanted agencies to stop using the antiquated GDS booking system. This had been the predominant way agency and airline systems communicated with each other for decades, but it was costly to operate and lacked certain capabilities. American wanted them to switch to the new NDC system, but agencies were reluctant to spend tons of money redeveloping their IT when it didn't benefit them. From the agency perspective, the status quo worked. From Americans' perspective, it did too, but it was costlier than the newer alternative and provided less opportunity for upsells and ancillaries. The biggest stick in this fight was American pulling the cheapest 40% of fares from that old system, only allowing them to be booked through the new one. That essentially meant that agencies that lacked compatibility with the new system would only be able to book their clients higher priced tickets, making them uncompetitive. Then they only added to the disincentive by eliminating mileage earning on bookings made through these non-compliant agencies. There were myriad other carrots and sticks in this campaign, but in broad strokes, it was American believing that they could cut out the middleman and create a better, more lucrative relationship with corporate customers. They were, unsurprisingly, wrong. En masse, agencies chose not to comply with Americans' demands and rather just avoided booking on American. And corporate customers didn't circumvent agencies en masse, they just kept the status quo and gave more business to Americans' competitors. By summer 2024, American reversed their changes, but the endeavor was estimated to have led to $1.5 billion in revenue loss in its first year, and the consequences of burned bridges undoubtedly still remain. Yet again, American wasted time, resources, and money trying to make this new corporate sales strategy work, and it just didn't. As American distracted themselves with fruitless new strategies for Seattle, Boston, the Northeast, and corporate sales, there was also the matter of what they weren't doing. They weren't focused on their Chicago hub, allowing for its continued decline while United expanded its market share in the valuable city. The airline offered 21% fewer seats from Chicago in 2024 relative to 2019, while United's capacity remained roughly equal. As a consequence, not only did American lose the loyalty of plenty of the city's customers, but they lost highly valuable gates too. Much like in Austin, the city of Chicago allocates its gates based on usage, and American was underutilizing theirs. Therefore, the city took 4 from the airline, whereas United, after a reshuffling that included plenty of the airport's other airlines, would gain 5 and be able to further build up their hub. American escalated this all the way into a prolonged lawsuit, but eventually, they lost that too. American hasn't been in such a poor financial position relative to its rivals for over a decade now. Quarter after quarter, it's earning billions less than Delta and United. Understandably, this has lit a fire under what's left of its management team. Vasu Raja, the chief commercial officer that oversaw the squeeze on travel agencies, was shown the door in June 2024, and the airline started to steadily rebuild its corporate sales team. A steady drip of 787s are being delivered, building capacity in that still hot long-haul market. With those deliveries, the airline is righting one of its past issues. Business class is by far the most profitable part of the plane, and demand for business class travel has been tremendously strong in recent years as consumer spending on travel grew, but American's planes have always been under-indexed on these seats. Their 787-9s, for example, only had 30 business class seats to United's 48. That left revenue on the table, but with these new 787 deliveries, American has rolled out a new configuration with 51 lie-flat seats. They're also fixing the hole left by retiring their 757s as they get ready to operate their first A321XLRs in the coming months. Like the 757, these are narrow-body aircraft configured for long-haul service with lie-flat business class seats and large fuel tanks enabling long range. And their introduction will allow American to improve the economics or expand to lower-demand European destinations. But these changes more or less get American back to where it started pre-COVID. And pre-COVID, it was already in the worst financial position of the big three. Over the past 5 years, the airline has hardly solved any of its major problems. It's only attempted to, and through these attempts, made the problems worse. American Airlines will need to find some major answers soon, lest it risk getting left in the dust, allowing the American airline industry to turn into a mere duopoly. Decision-making in the airline industry is clearly quite a quantitative affair. In the example of COVID, it required complex modeling of an unprecedented pandemic to determine when demand might recover and therefore what to do with aircraft, staff, and other assets. I think this is a great example of how much math permeates into just about any job or aspect of life, and that's exactly why I recommend our sponsor, Brilliant, so much. If you're anything like me, you didn't make it to very high levels of math in high school or college and therefore came into adulthood a bit rusty on some of the subjects. If so, Brilliant's courses are kind of perfect for you. They break subjects down into small chunks, then teach those chunks through interactive exercises, truly learning by doing. The advantage of these small chunks is that you can make progress learning something like calculus in just these small, free moments of your day. It doesn't take blocking off a whole lot of time and sitting down at your desk. It's kind of incredible that just through stacking small moments of your day progressing on your phone or computer, you can go from algebra to calculus to number theory to Bayesian probability. And they have even more than just math. They have a full catalog of top quality courses in technology, science, data analysis, and programming. Although I appreciate that they don't have that many courses because it shows the thoughtfulness they put into designing each one. Brilliant's been our single longest-term sponsor, as so many vendor reviewers have found them worthwhile, and you can find out why by learning for free when you go to brilliant.org/Wendover, scanning the QR code on screen, or clicking on the link in the description. Brilliant's also given our viewers 20% off an annual premium subscription, which gives you unlimited daily access to everything on Brilliant.